Good morning and Happy New Year, everyone. I'm Tracy McKibbin, the chair of the Finance and Risk Committee of the Authority and the New York State Canal Corporation. I'd like to welcome my fellow committee members, Chairman John Comel, Michael Balboni, Judge Eugene Nicandri. Joining us shortly will be Dennis Traynor and Anthony Pacenti, as well as Betheda Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our NYPA and Canal Corporation staff. Again, Happy New Year to everyone. Hope the new year has begun with good health and continued prosperity. This meeting has been duly noticed as required by the Open Meetings Law, and I call the meeting to order. All of the committee members have had a chance to review the agenda for today. I'll ask if there are any amendments to the agenda. With no amendments, I'll ask for a motion to adopt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The agenda is adopted. The next portion of this meeting will be held in executive session. I'll ask for a motion to conduct an executive session to discuss the financial and credit history of a particular corporation pursuant to Section 105 of the Public Officers Law.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. We'll be back with you shortly. I'll ask for a motion to resume the meeting in open session.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. No votes were taken during the executive session. We'll jump right into our discussion agenda. All of the committee members were polled prior to the meeting regarding any conflicts and have submitted all potential conflicts to the corporate secretary for inclusion in the minutes. I'll now ask Adrian Lotto, VP and Chief Risk and Resilience Officer, to present an update on the first item.
Good morning, Trustee McKibbin, trustees, and NYPA and Canal colleagues. I'm Adrian Lotto. I'm the Chief Risk and Resilience Officer for the NYPA and Canals. Next slide, please. So on today's agenda, we're going to be covering three things. First, an update on and seeking approval of our risk appetite statement out of committee and suggesting that it moves with the full board. Second, an update on our maturity roadmap for the Risk and Resilience Department and risk enterprise at NYPA. And then third, the 2022 merchant gross margin multi-year hedging strategy, which I will co-present with my colleagues at commercial operations. Next slide, please. So the first item again is the risk appetite statement. Next slide. As the trustees may be aware and recall, back in September, I presented a draft of the risk appetite statement and solicited feedback on that document, which seeks to really memorialize NYPA and Canal's willingness to take on risk at the authority and our ability to seek new opportunities. At that time, we did receive feedback, particularly four main areas. One was around separating DEI and ESG. Second, to increase and consider increasing our willingness to take on risk, as well as understanding the reward and trade-off. Third, we were asked to take a second look at reputational risk. And then finally, certainly in alignment with Vision 2030, we were asked to examine strategic risk and understanding as we sought to move through and operationalize Vision 2030, were we examining appropriately strategic risk. All of those changes have been addressed in the risk appetite before you. But on the next slide, which you'll see was the second phase of that work, which was understanding or creating key risk indicators relative to that risk appetite statement. Before you are approximately 20 or so key risk indicators, which are meant to ensure that the EMC, the board, has transparency into the risk appetite so that at any given moment we can understand where we are and whether or not we are operating within those respective categories. These categories, these KRIs, were vetted with each of the business unit owners and are consistent with what the business unit, and we solicited their feedback to ensure that we weren't, operating in a vacuum, and that this is specifically tailored to NIPA and Canals. So with that, I will pause, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have with regard to this risk appetite.
Adrian, I guess I'll just say, and I appreciate this, and obviously the work that you've done is, to come up with these key risk indicators, as well as our risk appetite statement, takes into consideration sort of, the industry that we're in and the kinds of risks that we would be taking on. The only question that I had, unfortunately, after we've done the risk appetite previous review of this, is the inclusion of digital and data as a risk indicator, and that being included among these categories. These are all pretty standard, would be expected, again, for the kind of industry we're in, the complexity of our industry and our operations unique to our business. But so, what are your thoughts on that as an inclusion of an element, I think, is a key risk that we should be monitoring? Again, as we become the leading digital utility, right? So that's a risk to monitor.
Yeah, no, Trustee McGibbon, I appreciate the question and certainly agree. As you just said, right, being the first end-to-end digital utility and sort of the way the industry is moving toward more decentralization of generation. We're taking on more and more, bringing in more and more data into the utility. It frankly does make sense. It is one of the things that was discussed with a key stakeholder, obviously, as it relates to data. Our CISO, Eric Myers, was one of the key stakeholders we discussed and met with. So I'm happy to have a meeting, take that back, and then include that as a KRI. That's not a problem.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Adrian? Great, thanks, Adrian. You want to keep going?
Sure. Secondly, this is a follow-up to, again, we had a conversation back in November, 2 short months ago, wherein I presented to the trustees a benchmarking that was done by myself and my team upon taking over the department in February. I was trying to ascertain and understand the level of maturity that exists within NIPA and Canals in terms of managing, in terms of risk management in our program. So next slide, please. So as you may recall, on slide 9, you will see that visually we scored, NIPA scored slightly below the industry benchmark. And I presented at that time some key areas wherein we need to advance our maturity. You could see those along the top here, but namely integration with strategy, enhancing our governance, ensuring that we have robust risk management processes, which include things like risk escalation pathways, and then improving our culture, and finally, ensuring regulatory compliance. Now, that's, again, not to say we are not doing these things at all, but rather that we would be seeking to get even more mature in particular areas. So next slide, please. At that time, what the trustees asked for was, over the course of the next year, what would be those particular tasks that we would seek to undertake at the authority to ensure that not only did we meet industry benchmark, but frankly exceeded it. And what I've outlined before you here is those tasks that risk and resilience, my department, as well as working obviously across the business units, plan to do and endeavor to take over the course of the next year to not only meet that industry benchmark, but exceed it. And at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Yeah, I applaud the effort here, Adrian, in general, and certainly to take an objective look in the mirror and self-assessment, self-awareness as to where we are versus where we want to be. And all I would ask is, I think it would be helpful visually if we could, my words, knit this even more together in terms of connecting our risk appetite with our current level of maturity, and maybe give us the slide 9 picture in terms of what you would expect your efforts on slide 10 to produce come year end. So if we could just connect the risk appetite with current maturity, these are the action steps and this is the outcome. So we've got something to measure and monitor against as you progress throughout the year. And frankly, that we as a board can get comfortable that we've got the right resource allocation, the right organizational commitment being brought to bear, because while you're responsible for monitoring and managing and navigating, it's an organizational responsibility to manage risk. And just want to ensure that we've appropriately deployed relevant resources, whatever they may be, intellectual, financial, or otherwise, to mitigate any current gaps or exposures we have and move with enough pace to put us in a more optimal position no later than year end. So if you could kind of knit that together a little bit for us, I think that would be helpful.
Certainly, I'm happy to do so. I can provide a slide, perhaps even at the next full board meeting in short order in the next 2 weeks.
That'd be great. Super.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I support that. The only other thing that I would add is, and I hope we'll have a discussion in the future going forward, is you're going to come back to us with this assessment of where there are gaps and how we're going to fill those gaps, how we're mitigating, how we're operating with, known gaps that we've self-assessed, right, to the chairman's point of where we expect to be at the end of the year, where we've recognized there are some gaps in our assessment. The other thing I would think would be good for us to have a view of going forward is how controls play a part, especially those areas where we have recognized gaps, right? How are we, an assessments of our risk and controls and addressing those areas. And so I hope you'll at some point in the future come back to us so we can have a view of where we look like, what our control environment looks like to help us mitigate, right, or address some of the areas where where there are high risks that we're willing to take, right, or where we've assessed there are gaps in our current status.
Yeah, Trustee McKibben, absolutely. As myself and Dolly Jinvit work very closely, who leads the controls department here at NYPA. And we've been doing a lot of great work, her team as well as my team collectively. So we would be happy to come back and perhaps make a joint presentation to the trustees on some of the work that's been going on over the past several months and provide all of you with that update. I think it would be certainly insightful and frankly, enable the teams to highlight some of the good work they've been doing over the past year.
Great, thank you.
Next slide, please. So with that, the final presentation for this meeting today is going to be a joint presentation between my team, Earl on my team is here today, but also Brian Chan, Sarah Salati is also going to present on the, there was a request to present on the multi-year hedging strategy, which just I'll offer maybe some opening comments, which is, fundamentally in 2020, the board approved a shift in the portfolio management approach that we were using from an asset optimization or revenue maximization to a volumetric hedging strategy. So the purpose of that volumetric hedging strategy is simply to mitigate our downside risk as we see, if we see prices declining, and really enable us to decrease our volatility and achieve our annual budget targets. So with that, I will turn over to Brian Chen and then eventually Earl to present a few slides and answer any questions you may have. Brian?
Thank you, Adrian. So let me start. Good morning, everybody. Let me first start off by saying thank you for everyone's time and the opportunity to present in front of the committee today. Let me introduce myself. My name is Brian Chan. I'm the director of the market analysis and hedging team in commercial ops. And today I'll be providing an informational update on the hedging program, which includes our successes in the past year, as well as reiterating the continued strategy going into 2022 and forward. So as a general reminder, like Adrian said, the hedging program is a tool utilized to mitigate the market volatility of the energy commodities market. Specifically, we're looking to manage the downside risk, downside exposure on the price volatility. Now, our multi-year hedging strategy is designed to layer in hedges over a period of time, very similar to what everyone knows as the dollar cost averaging strategy. So we're essentially financially protecting the merchant portfolio at regular intervals, regardless of price, to line up to the NYPA budget setting process. Now, we do recognize that forecasts and market conditions change on a regular basis, but the guiding principle behind the program is risk reduction for the merchant gross margin revenues, and therefore added stability to the NYPA portfolio, the NYPA budget as a whole. So now let's take a look at the program itself. So let me start off with that first slide on the left. It's a representation of our trade count starting from 2019 up to 2021. So what you notice is in 2019 we did have a pretty fairly naked merchant portfolio in terms of hedging, and so that's why you see the low number of hedges. However, in 2020 we actually initiated the new program mid 2020. However, we had to kind of ramp up a bit extra, and therefore you see the large increases. Now, 2021 is actually the first year of a stabilized, quote unquote, normalized year budgeted, where the portfolio is set up for regular hedging. And so I think going forward, what we should expect to see is that trade volume that we see in 2021, that normalized volume, which kind of equate, just to kind of simplify it a little bit more, that equates to about 1 or 2 trades a week, depending on the volume. So now, these lower volumes this year doesn't necessarily mean it's less workload. It's just that on a day-to-day basis, the team still is out there constantly communicating with counterparties, brokers, exchanges, our internal NYPA counterparts. And this proactive communication is really just set up to keep us agile when there's new information, whether it be internal or external, that impacts our merchant portfolio. So now what we don't have right here, but we are going to work on once the 2021 numbers are finalized for December, is for the chairman, is that we'll put a settlements number so that we could kind of really value a look back to the portfolio. But on a going forward basis, what we want to also see is, besides the workload, is, well, what's the actual impact here, right? So since hedges are layered in over the course of time, it's very hard to see a snapshot on the day-to-day changes that we see in the daily risk emails. So what we're doing here is we ran a what-if scenario. So the question is, what if we were never hedged? So in taking a look at these numbers, the green bar actually represents our current state as of November month end. Again, we're selecting November because these are the finalized numbers, while December's are still getting reconciled and cleaned up. Now, what you'll see here is for November month end for 2022, we're showing a downside risk exposure of about $50 million. And then what we did was we went back into the system, reran the numbers, and it showed us that, well, if we took out all the hedges, our risk exposure actually would be about $106 million. So there's a risk reduction of about $56 million in totality. So what you'll notice here also is that as these bars go out in the outer years, you'll notice that the difference in the bars gets smaller, right? And again, that is by design, because like we said earlier, we are layering these hedges over the course of time. So what you'll end up seeing is year over year that by this time next year, you should expect to see 2023 risk exposure in a very similar fashion to what we see today for 2022. Next slide, please.
So I'm sorry, Brian, before we go
No,
on,
okay.
because I don't want the point to be lost. We're looking,
Yep.
you know, and the next slide's going to look ahead. And as we've had a discussion about why we made the change in 2020 around our hedging strategy. And I think you mentioned you're going to come back to us to provide us that picture, because just as we're limiting our downside, we're also limiting our upside. And so can you just give us a quantitative, assessment of how much we've hedged compared to 2019? You've got 2019, you've got 2020 and 21. Where we were in 19, how much we were hedging, how much we hedged in 2020, and how much we've hedged in 21, and what impact that had on our margins. Do you have
Okay.
that number
So
that you can share with us?
Yeah, so I would say going back to 2019 and 2020, our hedging percentage was down about, I would say, 7% on the book in totality. What I don't have the exact numbers on is for 2019 and 2020, which we can get in terms of the actual settlements of these hedges, which we can refer to as the cost of the hedging program. What we do see for 2021 on the settlement side for these hedges, it's about $30 million out of the money hedge settlements. So
We're hedging about,
of,
what was the percentage?
Oh, sorry,
about
my apologies.
60, 70%?
Yeah, so the hedging percentage is 70. Our strategy goal is to enter into the prompt year with 65.
Great.
So and that's going to be the that's going to be the strategy we do continue forward and into 2022.
Okay, you can continue. Thanks.
Thanks. So moving forward this year, just to let everyone know, just to remind everyone, the October 8th, 2021 snapshot has been selected as the merchant gross margin target setting date, as you can see highlighted in the orange bar. And in the green bar, we're using, again, the November month end snapshot as well, which is slightly ahead of target. Now, from a very high level, you'll see that the 22 and the 23 valuations are pretty close to target. And again, reiterating the fact that we're giving more stability to that budget setting. Now, in 2024 and 2025, what you'll see is that it has decreased a bit. And again, this is November, but I did take a look at even today's latest valuation, and it's still within the same range, which is the range of the P25 and the P75. This difference is driven by the volatility in both the energy prices and the hydro generation volumes, given the uncertainty we typically experience seeing in those outer years. So with all that said, we do plan to continue our strategy from 21 to 22 in terms of those hedging targets that we have set for ourselves. Now, one of the key changes I do want to highlight to the board is that for the prompt year, what we do plan to do is accelerate achieving those targets by the end of August, so that we kind of line up our goals to when finance sets their budget for NYPA. So I think that's going to be a very beneficial step in ensuring more stability for the budget setting process. So now I just want to close by reaffirming the fundamental successes and the continuation of the ongoing improvements in the hedging program and strategy. On December 21st, we did present also in front of the ERMC committee to get a unanimous approval to continue the strategy in 2022. So unless we want to save questions for the end, let me go ahead and pass this off to my counterpart in risk, Earl, to discuss the governance portion of the program. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Brian. If you could, so good morning, trustees, EMC. My name is Earl Fanlagi, and I'm responsible for marketing commodities risk within risk management. I'm here today to give you an overview on the governance on this portfolio that commercial ops is managing. And I think, as you recall, as directed by trustee action previously, the trustees have authorized the Executive Risk and Resilience Committee to provide oversight on the energy and non-energy commodity hedge programs. And what I'd like to talk to you about today are the governance surrounding these programs. On the left side of the slide, you can see I'm going to talk about some of the policies and procedures that are in place, in that what we have laid out for the organization, that each group has identified specific roles, responsibilities. So we ensure that there's segregation of duties when we perform a lot of the hedging activities and its supporting functions. We also, within this governance structure, define allowable strategies and instruments specifically to state that the portfolio be of a non-speculative nature, meaning that if we were to take any activity, any hedges in place, it would be intended to mitigate any price exposures. Additionally, we also set thresholds to govern the activity, such as transaction limits, so that the volumes that each trader engages in, and also the tenor, meaning how far in the future they're engaging, is limited based on their hierarchy within the organization and also for awareness. As I move to the right side of the slide, I'm then going to talk about how my team operationalizes this, meaning how we monitor and how we report on the portfolio on a daily basis to ensure that the activities that the commercial ops team is actually performing is in conformance with the approved strategies of the ERRMC. So I think a big part of what my team does is we take a look at the valuation of the market in terms of taking a look at the energy that we have in our portfolio, taking a look at market conditions, and we provide valuations to the NIPA management team. And we also report on potential price movements using statistical analysis. Doing this helps us identify evolving market risks, like if there's an increased risk to natural gas due to weather, or to energy prices because of any constraints in the market. At the same time, the team also reviews executed trades for adherence to the strategy that Brian mentioned is affirmed annually. And again, from an official perspective, we perform hedge effectiveness testing every quarter, and we report that to the controller's office to independently demonstrate that these hedges are indeed mitigating the price exposure, and again, to indicate that we are not in a speculative activity. Lastly, I think I just want to talk about how models are used to inform decisions, and as part of my team's role, we take a look at model inputs, and we have continual discussions with the comm ops team to ensure that the model is actually reflecting market conditions as best as possible to have us an informed tool to guide further business decisions. With that said, I think one of the most important parts of this program is that we have continuous communications between the teams and that we have an escalation path to the Chief Risk and Resilience Officer, Adrian, and also Adam, the Chief Financial Officer, the committee, and also the trustees in order to report any activities for transparency. Again, I'd like to close it out that with the strategy being reaffirmed last month, we have confidence that this is the right path, that it is mitigating price volatility and is able to bring greater price certainty to our merchant revenue portfolio. With that said, I turn it over to you, Trustee McKibben, if you have any questions.
I don't have any questions. Thank you very much, Brian and Earl. Any questions from the committee?
I'd be interested to figure out what's appropriate rhythm. We haven't talked much about the counterparty side. I assume we haven't had any fails or any issues there. I mean, how we evaluate who's rated what. I mean, who we do business with. I know you've talked to us before, in the past, but it would be good to get some kind of, reporting out at least just to understand, who's on the other side of the transactions and, what our exposure limits are with them and all the rest. If we could just periodically refresh that as to, the active roster, that would be helpful as well.
Yep, that's a good point, Mr. Chairman. We are actually going through that process now, and we're going to try to, do two things: is to expand and diversify the number of counterparties we can trade with, and assure that the limits are appropriate, and also on our side, find ways. For the most part, many of the transactions we do are cash collateralized for mark-to-market differences. But in terms of where the market has gone since it's gone higher, it's been NIPA having to put up the cash as the collateral. So we're looking to do is be more efficient about that, either by using an LC or getting better terms with other counterparties that will accept, our great credit rating to avoid the need to, utilize our cash to improve our liquidity position. So it's a good point that you raised, and we're actually going through that process now to sort of fine tune it and optimize it to exactly your point. So it was a good observation on your part, and we'll get back to you on where we land.
Yeah, and I would just add, Adam, it's actually Chairman Quamel, the ERRMC is having a presentation next week on October 19th on,
We lost you, Adrian.
ooh, you guys
I
can't
can
hear me.
hear. I can hear you.
So there's going to be a presentation next week to the ERRMC on that as well. So your timing is serendipitous, and perhaps we can bring forward that presentation to the board after we discuss it with the ERMC next week.
Yeah, I'm more than interested in your outcomes, Adam. We got to put cash on the barrelhead here that we're deemed to be of such a level of risk that we got to put our passbook savings account up as collateral. So yeah, I'll be real interested to hear the outcome of that one. So okay, all right, yeah, that, and I would say let's just make it part of like a regular rhythm. Just update us on where you are with key players, and just an affirmation that there's been no fails or anything. So just so there's just an ongoing interaction. But appreciate the discussion on it. Thank you.
Great. If there are no other questions, we'll move on to, there's no votes necessary. This was just an update. We'll now, Adam, you will continue, and Adam is our Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, and he'll present the next item on some bond issuances.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and trustees. Good morning, members of the public, NIPA colleagues. As you recall, in the December meeting, we approved to do a separately financed project, meaning a separate credit aside from the NIPA credit for certain priority transmission projects that have certain FERC orders and cost recovery mechanisms in place. The approval last meeting was for $300 million regarding our Central East Energy Connect project, based on feedback from rating agencies, which has been very successful and has affirmed our view in terms of the separateness of the financing aside from the NIPA credit, and that it's a very strong credit to stand on its own. And given our financing needs coming up this year, as well as where we are in the interest rate cycle and trying to optimize efficiency around our issuances so that we don't have too many issuances and have multiple issuance costs and be more efficient, we're asking for the trustees to this committee recommend to the full board the inclusion of the Smart Path project, which has also been already approved, has all the FERC orders in place to this first financing. And that one, please change the slide if we can, would be to add both the Smart Path, which would be up to $500 million for a term not to exceed 40 years, interest rate not to exceed 5%, as well as release $65 million from the trust estate in order to represent NIPA's equity in that project, and allow us to move forward with a one financing that we hope to achieve by the end of the first quarter. So if there's any questions on that, I'd be happy to entertain it.
Adam, if I understand correctly, these are all items that the board has already approved, and the Smart Path being one that we're just moving the timeline more to the left than to right. But again, another item that we have already previously approved. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. Any other questions from the committee?
now kudos on yeah, enhancing the effort here with the Smart Path project. So yeah, win-win on multiple fronts there. Good work.
Yeah, I agree. So Adam, what you referenced the Smart Path there. These are 3 separate items, and they're all, each item we need as a release of additional funds in support of separately.
Right. So we need approval for really 2 things. One is the resolution approving the issuance of the bonds for the Smart Path project, not to exceed the $500 million amount, as I said, for the term of 30 years, and then the release of funds that would represent the our equity into the project of up to $65 million for that. So it's those 2 authorizations that we're requesting to be recommended to the full board.
Great, thank you. So with that, if there are no additional questions, I'll entertain a motion to recommend those 2 items to the full board for adoption.
So moved.
Okay.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And Adam, you referenced the Smart Path, but we're now going to turn to a fuller discussion around the Smart Path Connect project, and I'll turn it over to Andrew Blay, who are VP of Project and Construction Management, to present actually the next 2 items on our agenda. Andrew?
Good morning. I'm here to present 2 items on behalf of operations. The first item is a contract award for the Smart Path Connect project for steel pole structures and anchorage bolt cages. Today, we're requesting a Finance and Risk Committee recommend approval of a 5-year contract award to Sabre Industries in the amount of approximately $71.5 million with an additional $20 million in funding authorization for a total of $91.5 million to the Board of Trustees. As you may recall, Smart Path Connect project, previously known as Northern New York PPTN, was approved at the July 2021 meeting. The authority's portion of the project consists of rebuilding over 50 circuit miles of transmission line and includes 8 new or upgraded substations. This project will be delivered with the authority's co-participant, National Grid. In order to meet the project schedule, interim approval in the amount of $5.6 million has been issued to commence engineering. The contract scope includes engineering, testing, fabrication, and delivery of steel poles and anchorage bolts required for the Smart Path Connect project. Construction is scheduled to commence later this year and planned to be complete at the end of 2025. This award is in alignment with the project estimate of $605 million for the authority's portion and is included in the approved 4-year capital plan. A request for proposal was issued in October 2021. 5 proposals were received in November, which were reviewed by a cross-functional committee. Among other evaluation criteria, the bids were reviewed based on cost, technical and commercial requirements, quality, and relevant experience. Following an extensive evaluation process, the committee recommends an award to Sabre Industries in the amount of approximately $71.5 million for a 5-year term. Sabre submitted the lowest price and was deemed the best value proposal. Their proposal is also compliant with Article 22 of the authority's contract boilerplate, which references the Buy American Act. Also to note, Sabre is successfully providing steel components for the ongoing Smart Path project. WMBE goals were waived on this bid event as it was deemed to offer no prime or subcontracting opportunities as allowed per the New York State Article 15A. The requested additional $20 million in funding is for additional steel components, managing risks and price fluctuations, and engineering optimization. Thank you. I will now take any questions.
Any questions for Andrew?
Andrew, give us a little bit more on what I'll call the contingency money here. The 20 million, at least as a percentage of the contract's fairly hefty. Seems like an inordinately high contingency number. I saw in the narrative 6 million of that is for A-frames and other steel, but it appears that 14 million is literally a contingency amount. Educate us a little bit more as to the need for what I'll call a 20% contingency here.
Understood. Some of that
Supply chain issues that volatile, and or is there more to it?
No, you're spot on there with supply chain volatility. Also, the fluctuation in commodity pricing is impacting us. On top of that, as we have to manage the risk of associated with additional needs along the line.
So the quantification of the 20 is, I mean, why is 20 better than 10, better than 50? I mean, help me with how you came up with 20 then.
It was determined based on what we have seen in the last 6 to 8 months regarding volatility and commodity pricing. That's the bulk of it.
So market pricing versus our own, experience in terms of contract execution, and this is just general market pricing, or have we seen those kind of overruns in work that we're otherwise doing and have previously approved?
We are seeing it not only through our previous contract awards, but we're also seeing it through the market volatility and just doing some outreach to understand where the market is at today.
I would also add, Chairman, that based on the ongoing Smart Path project, this is Smart Path Connect. The team has done some innovative things there with changing the design of the poles along the way to save money on construction. And these are things we're still learning as the project's being developed. So there's some anticipation there of spending maybe a bit more on pole design and material to save us money on the construction side. So again, just more lessons learned from the ongoing Smart Path project as well.
All I'm trying to get to, Trish, is so the overall project of 600 million, it's a $600 million project. I'm saying, are we looking at a $700 million project?
No, I think
this, or you're
right. As
saying
Andy
there's some
mentioned,
trade-offs.
it's included.
Some trade-offs to be achieved here.
Right. The goal is still 605 is still the total project estimate. So the 91 is still included within that 605. Obviously, 605 does have contingency, right? We're very early on in the project, but this number is included in the 605.
Okay. Well, real-time evidence of the reality of where we find ourselves today, supply chain, inflation, or otherwise. So very much, in our face. So, okay. If you're looking for a motion to approve this.
Yeah, I do
Tracy,
need a motion on this.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye, motion carried. And I think you're going to continue, Andrew, on the next Y49 transmission line item.
Correct. Thank you. The second item is a contract award for Y49 transmission line reconductoring in the Nassau County. Today, we are requesting that the Finance and Risk Committee recommend an award of 2-year contract in the approximate amount of $32.9 million to Elecnor Hawkeye, with an additional $5 million in a funding authorization for a total of $37.9 million to the Board of Trustees. The Long Island Sound Cable, or Y49, spans approximately 26 miles from Springbrook to East Garden City. And as you may recall, this project was approved at the September 2021 meeting. The contract scope includes engineering, procurement, and construction to replace the 10 circuit miles of underground transmission line in Nassau County. It also includes the replacement of fiber optic cable across the entire 26-mile feeder circuit, which is required for the protection and communication of the circuit. The construction work is scheduled to commence this fall and be completed in the summer of 2023. The request for proposal was issued in September 2021, and 4 proposals were received in October, which were reviewed by a cross-functional committee. Among other evaluation criteria, the bids were reviewed based on cost, technical and commercial requirements, quality, relevant experience, including the firm's safety records. Following an extensive evaluation process, the committee recommends an award to Elecnor Hawkeye in the amount of approximately $32.9 million for a 2-year term. The Elecnor Hawkeye was deemed the best value proposal and is compliant with all the supplier diversity goals. The requested additional $5 million in funding is to manage environmental risks along the course of the work. In accordance with New York Independent System Operator tariff requirements for cost recovery of the project, a capital plan meeting was held in October 2021 with the transmission owners with only a few questions and no objections. This project is below the tariff threshold for voting requirements and will be recovered through the tariff. Thank you. I'll now take any questions.
Any questions for Andrew on this transmission line? Again, previously approved. This is the next segment of it. Any questions? There being no questions, I'll entertain a motion to recommend this item to the full board for
So moved.
adoption.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Sorry, go ahead. Did I hear a question?
Yeah, I'll just say one general comment or question, Trace, for Trish or whomever. Given what at least my recall is some fairly significant potential cost increases, and got, I don't know, you tell me how many billion of contracts out at this point, 100 million, hundreds of millions that have been approved. I'd be interested in your real-time assessment of the contingencies that had been included in what was originally brought to us and approved versus what you now think is required. We've had discussion in the past about overruns are atypical at best or at worst for us. But yeah, I'd like, in light of supply chain issues, inflationary pressures, et cetera, if you could give us kind of a global overview of where we are with all of the contracts that are out, or at least the significant contracts are out. If you think we're going to be bumping up against, any issues, at least like to have some directional sense of that. Doesn't need to be super granular, but again, I don't have a sense for what kind of contingencies were otherwise built in or what other offsets you could have. So I think you get the gist of my point. I'm sure you're managing that, but just trying to understand what, if anything, we should be anticipating in terms of cost increases overall and where we find ourselves, and presumably will continue to find ourselves for the foreseeable future.
Understood, Chairman. I'll take a note, and I'll work with John Canal and SSM to review our past contracts and understand where we are at with contingencies and bring it back to the board.
Andrew, is this the line that the ship dropped its anchor on that damaged the line?
Yes, it is, sir.
I think maybe just, I was just gonna say, Chairman, just to maybe, I think, briefly address, I think, and again, Andy and Canale could put together a more detailed response. But I would just say, like, we've been much smarter in our contracting methodologies. I would say in the last couple of years, we've had to, as contracts have gone from very small and firm to different types of methodologies, design build. So we've just had to get a bit more smarter with market. Canale's team has done a nice job to do more market research. What's out there, where are the risks? So I think we've kind of grown in that, matured in that area in terms of contingency required, price fluctuations. So I think the team has done a nice job. And again, Andy and John can put together a detailed response with what we're seeing in contingency spend versus price increases. We can provide some further detail.
And if I may, this is Joe. I would also add that anecdotally, we are seeing some of the very pressures that you referred to. In fact, there's a couple of cases where our own vendors are looking to either displace our our orders in the queue or expedite our orders in the queue based on other demands that they have. So there are certain choke points in some of the major issues, pieces of equipment, transformers and so forth that we're already seeing anecdotally. They have not directly impacted our schedule and budget to date, but those kinds of conversations are something we're keeping a close eye on.
Yeah, I agree with the chairman. I think it's a very good point that we should have a discussion around that, because NIPA isn't unique. We're living in the same world, coming out of the pandemic as everyone else. And so while most of the contracts that we've looked at today were negotiated during, over the last, 2 years or so, and my guess is you naturally have contingency room in most of these awards, but it has been a unique 2 years. And so you're probably running up against those contingencies sooner than you expected throughout the life of these constructions. So having a discussion or conversation at the full board or wherever, even I'm happy to do it here at the committee, around where you see we are in all these, especially these significant large dollar amount contracts, would be a very useful and helpful discussion. So I agree.
You can just actually bring it back to the committee, and to hear Joe talk about some choke points. You'd like to think that the size of the contracts we have gives us significant leverage with vendors and providers, but I realize there's only so much they can do if they're backed up against it. So yeah, back to whole risk mitigation and the like. Yeah, if we could just get an update as to major projects, major spends, what, if anything, you see as significant risk issues that we should be aware of, that would be appreciated. So
we've got some great examples to utilize, contracts of major size. And it's also important to recognize too, that's one of the reasons why we're trying to establish these long-term agreements with these suppliers for, major electrical equipment, et cetera, so that we can establish those unique relationships.
Right. Yeah. And to my point, it's like these are large contracts and there's some contingency built into them. And so, are we hitting up against those sooner than we expected throughout the life of these contracts? Okay, great. I look forward to that discussion. Any other questions? All right, the consent agenda is before the committee for adoption. I'll ask for a motion to adopt the consent agenda.
So move.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion carries. If there are no further questions, the date of the next joint Finance and Risk Committee meeting is scheduled to be held on March 18th. I'll ask for a motion to close the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Again,
Thank you, Tracy.
continue to remain
Thank
healthy
you.
and
Yep.
safe. Thank you for all your work.
Thanks.
Talk
Tracy.
soon, everyone. See you in a couple
Thank you.
weeks.